Much. Andres, welcome to Design and Dialogue. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Glenn. It's great to be here and discuss with you.
Yeah, and you're beaming in from physical space, not virtual space, I see.
Yeah, today.
Yeah. So in Barcelona, yeah?
I'm in Barcelona, yes.
Cool.
Pretty nice time here. Almost summer, I can say.
Yeah, here in New York as well. So the reason I put it that way is because we have this opportunity to speak with you about the present and future prospects of digital design at, I would say, a kind of more intense level than anything we've been able to do on Design and Dialogue so far. Not that we haven't had many designers who work with digital tools and explore that universe. You know, Joris Laarman springs to mind, obviously a very key figure, just for example. But you are working in a way that, at least in terms of our interview series and almost in the discipline, is unique, in the sense that you're creating digital born artifacts. And you have often talked about your practice as a means of building a bridge between the virtual and the physical. So before we get into images, I thought I would just ask you what that phrase means and what the nature of that bridge is, and kind of what the intention of that project is for you.
Well, I think it's worth to mention that I was one of these kids with computer since, I don't know, I have 10 years old or something. So I was always doing stuff in the computer, like exploring it and downloading dangerous stuff and things. So while my other peers were like playing video games or that stuff, I was just into creating stuff or creating the rules for playing games instead of playing the rules of others. So I was always into this kind of rabbit hole of digital information and what to do with and how can I create with it. I was always very encouraged by the idea of having one tool as a computer and can create everything and anything I have in my mind from there without any more resources than my time. So that was my first kickoff. And that's how I started to create these bridges to the physical world, because once I had like 10 years of experience or more in digital art and digital design, everyone was asking me if those designs and artworks were real. Something very like interesting for me and very like in a philosophical way, because I always compare it with a kind of a letter that you can send a physical letter to someone and the other person will read it in I don't know, 1 month later maybe, and the letter and the message is real, of course, but you don't have the other person in front of you. So I think and I feel this digital realm in the same concepts. So I started to create these bridges. First was very like first steps, and then I started to create more like important bridges like installations and some objects that were very iconic and recognizable in the design world. Why? Because it was very difficult for me to legitimize my work in the digital if I didn't have any kind of physical piece that exists, that it's real. So in order to legitimize and to present my work in the digital and the importance of my work in the digital realm, I had to start working on the physical, the thing that everyone understands and we are all in the same page.
Okay, that word legitimacy strikes me as a very interesting one, and I want to get back to that, the extent to which the physical legitimizes the digital, and also, funnily enough, vice versa, and that they sort of vouch for each other in some way. But I think partly because you answered that question in a sort of biographical way, I think it might be nice to start looking at some images because among other things, you're thinking about the process by which these objects come about in a sort of the span of your own life, not just the technology or the process. So let me just open up the PowerPoint. There we go. And we can start looking at some rather amazing pictures. So can you say, first of all, Andres, how you first came to digital design? What was the context? Where were you? What were you up to?
Yeah, I was like almost, I don't know, like more than 10 years ago. I was in the University of Buenos Aires in the in the design, graphic design part. But almost all my teachers and professors were architects, so they were always encouraging us to create and work and play with space, with volume, with light, with spatiality, and to understand that in the university spaces, and taking taking spaces of the university and to create installations and the stuff. So I was always very attracted to work in volume, not rather into 2D design and very plain graphic, like is more understandable. So once I get into the university, I started to spend some time with architects. They were always very insightful and very interesting people. And one of my friends, architects, there suggested me to start creating and start learning things in 3D with these CGI softwares. At that time was like almost all of the users of these softwares were architects or product designers. Yeah, more like an industrial thing. And then
was it also, Andres, connected to the film industry? So were some of the CGI tools the kinds that would be used in the construction of digital special effects?
Yeah, of course. At that moment, for me, that was like, it was very technician. What it was like creating things for movies and video production was very for, yeah, the learning curve was very hard. So I started just using some primitive shapes and creating these first images that you see. This was not my first renders, my first images, of course, but it was very the beginning of my style and my expressions, working with balance and primitive shapes.
Yeah, it's interesting too that these images already start to suggest something like an enclosed world, because the idea of counterbalance and the way that each object is relating to another object in this kind of intrinsic microsystem, that feels quite interesting to me, because you're often creating a sort of hermetic, like a sealed world in some sense, as we'll see. And it's interesting that that instinct was already with you so early on. Let's look at another example of these early renders.
Yeah, it's kind of a cliche, the word render, but I always was trying to use the word artwork and word. I always see it like sculptures, or like these ones. For me, they were sculptures. I have been seeing these while creating them in volume, because in the CGI softwares, in 3D softwares, you can navigate through and from all the sides. So you feel almost like if you are already into the tools like the tablet and you feel very comfortable because you use it a lot, you really think that are your tools, like a sculpture. So it's almost the same feeling, and I couldn't understand why people always thought these were like kind of gaming assets.
Yeah. Well, although they're also liberated from the physical domain of sculpture as we normally experience here. Obviously, you're working without gravity, which is it's an opportunity that a sculptor doesn't have. So you were already immediately turning to possibilities of form making that could only exist within a virtual context. No.
Yeah, I think it was always like this. Uh, a bed, a used bed is not a sculpture until it is. So I think it's a matter of time and expanding the boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah. So in other words, um, once you get used to the idea that sculpture could be a non-gravitational art form, it just opens up a new set of possibilities, and you explore them, and the typology or the disciplinary constraint dissolves when you make that decision. And
Yeah,
it's just a matter of getting used to it.
that's a great way you put it.
Hmm. Okay, so then we're accelerating quite quickly here now to 2018. So this is just a couple of years ago. And this is when your palette and your world building has already been pretty well developed. And again, we're in a purely digital space here, right, Andres? I have to keep checking with you. But
Yeah,
this is
yes,
this
of
is a
course.
digital only image, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, viewers will let you know when we hit something real in the sense of physical, like you could knock your knuckles against it. So can you say a little bit about how you got to this aesthetic palette?
Well, I was at this time. I was very much comfortable with the tools, so I started to forget about how to create something or how to achieve like a perfect, hyper realistic and that stuff. So I forget about all of that and just understood that I can use those tools to communicate my vision, my my thing, like what is my narrative, what I want to discuss with the viewer.
Mhm.
So I started to create this series that was one of my beloved ones, that is called Plastic Rain, and it was I always call them digital installations, um, because almost my whole body of work respects the loss of reality in a 90%. Yeah, I think so. So there's always like a kind of a very minimal stuff that it's not real, or it's not function as in the world that we live. Because I really think that if I push too much, that I will transport the viewer into a more gamified world where I don't feel identified with that, and I don't want to. So I have very strict boundaries of how to treat my loss of the physics in the digital world, in order to communicate what I want and not to overexpress what the digital can do.
Huh, that's fascinating. So that implies that this is really what we were talking about at the beginning, that the physical and the digital, as I said, they vouch for one another. So they provide an anchor of reference, maybe. So what I hear you saying is that it was important to you in creating these digital installations. Really interesting phrase, by the way, that. But in creating these digital installations, it was important to you to retain enough realism or sense of possibility that it provided a bridge or a means for the viewer to cross into that image and have a certain kind of belief in it. Is that a fair
Yeah,
way of
that's
describing it?
exactly, yeah.
Okay, that's super interesting. I mean, that again, of course, is maybe a little bit like Hollywood film, because so often, instead of being plunged into pure abstraction or anarchic chaos, what you get is a narrative that's a sort of skewed or altered version of what you would experience in everyday life. So maybe there's a parallel there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Would you say also that the depopulation of these images, the lack of people in them, is intended? I mean, is that more a feature of the difficulty of creating a lifelike person and the problem of the uncanny valley? or is it intentional in the sense of wanting to create a world that's only occupied by the viewer's mind? What's going on with that?
Well, it's nowadays it's not so complicated to integrate and to create virtual humans, and in a couple of years will be something very, very, very easy. But I think it's not a thing of a technicity limit. It's more about I just love when I enter to an installation and I'm alone in the whole space, and I can really feel it with whatever I want, instead of having people inside, visitors, or and I'm not into like I will, I don't know, maybe in the future, but a digital performance of actors, of digital actors in a digital space. But these plastic rain digital installations were to communicate a feeling of emptiness, of calmness, to be felt by the viewer.
What would you say if I suggested that they also have some melancholy to them? Because what you're describing as a kind of blissful or almost utopian aloneness could also, of course, be understood as a kind of loneliness or placelessness. And I could imagine somebody thinking that the poetics of the digital that you're presenting captures both the attractiveness of plunging into that magic world, but also some of its sense of isolation and alienation. What do you think about that?
I think it's pretty interesting because you have to think that when I'm working on these installations and almost my whole work, I'm alone in front of a screen with a pen, digital pen, and a keyboard. So it's a big part of it.
How long does it take you to build one of them, if I may ask?
It really depends. Some ideas just came in a couple of hours, while some others appear in a month. It's like very test and error. It's like going back and forth all the time, and just yeah. I think it's almost like a handcrafting something.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, it is like a handcraft in the sense that you're there with the work, watching it take shape, and it has a kind of intuitive, gradual sense, perhaps. Of course, it's very unlike a handcraft in that you don't have a material pushing back at you, and you don't have the real, studio around you with all of the miscellaneous features that a studio has. Because when you conjured that image for us of sitting alone in front of the screen with the digital pen and the keyboard, somehow that feels alone in a different way than a person in their studio does. Maybe that's just me, but psychologically, what you just described feels quite specific.
That's very interesting. That you have to think also that my studio is filled with the physical objects that I create, not with digital ones yet, because the technology is not there, and there's a lot of friction into that. So as far as I can go, my screen and the UI, the interface of these softwares, it's gray. It's very grid based, very you are always with numbers and very mathematical stuff in order to achieve these results. So it's a kind of a way of isolation, and really while creating this, and when you are seeing results like this in this context, you really feel or I feel like complete, like now I have a place to look that it's more beautiful than all I see in the screen.
Okay, it's
Like escape.
It's interesting to think about color too. I mean, we were just looking at a couple of images that I would describe as in the millennial pink palette, which is like a color that's almost not a color anymore. It's almost like a cipher for the digital chromatic universe. But then sometimes you use super strong color, as we can see here, like this cobalt blue or this super hot intense pink. And here I actually, in a funny way, feel more like I'm being confounded as to whether I'm looking at a physical thing or not. I don't know if that has to do with the strong color or if it's just how you're going about creating this space. So I wonder, in that moment when you decide how to infuse that grayscale structural world that you've built with color, is what happens there for you creatively?
That's a tricky one, because I like to think of color as a as a property that change the shape, and not something that paints it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I use color, I really use it as a very thoughtful tool, and not just to paint something because it needs color. So in these two installations, aren't. It would be like nothing if there's not the color punching your face, like in the first. So I usually think of everything I create as an emotional communication.
It also strikes me that color, I mean, we keep using the word real as if we understand what it means. Like the real thing is the physical thing. As I said, you can, wrap your knuckles on it. And the thing on the screen is the not real thing. But obviously the thing on the screen is quite real on its own terms. And in a way, its color is the realest thing about it. I mean, a blue thing on your screen is just as blue as the cover of a book or a ball sitting on your table. And so maybe the color is itself at least a part of how that bridge gets built. That idea occurs to me. And so it's striking that you're using it in such a striking way,
Yeah, I don't usually use so striking colors, but when I think they are well, this image of the big space with the magenta wall was all about the color, and it started because of the color. I was not creating this space, and then I painted the wall. I was this is like a magenta square. It's like, it's not more than that graphically. If you maybe close a little bit your eyes, it's just a square. But the idea of feeling there and have this enormous, gigantic wall of this color that it's very alien to my work, express exactly what I wanted in my work in this area.
Okay. I suppose, one thing that blue object raises is also the question of functionality, and something that is quasi-functional, which is maybe another kind of bridge between the virtual and the physical. But maybe we should talk about another kind of bridge, which is what happens when we actually make something physically in 3D. And I think I'm right in saying that this is now a physical environment. Is that right? That you create?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I'm not totally lost. So can you explain, this is a chamber, the the belated and much admired gallery in New York City. Can you say a little bit about this project and it as a milestone for you in your career so far?
Yeah, of course. When Chamber called me to to start discussing about collaboration, they were always they were very intrigued and curious about my work, but there was always like a doubt of how to show it. How can we show your work in a way chamber community can understand it? So I proposed this kind of exact copy of the digital render into this space. So what I did was recreate the space that we are seeing in 3D till the last details, and I started to create this place with this sofa, this group sofa, this lamp, and the divider. So I propose these three objects to create it physically and to be habited by physical people. And it was a big thing in my career, because it was the first time where I saw people with personal and individual intentions into my creations.
Yeah. It's almost the opposite of what we were just talking about, to see that, that smaller image on the right and the communal sense that you get from people occupying this world that you've built for them. So it's like the optics the social register of the work flipped around just by bringing it out into real space, physical space.
Yeah, and I have to say that when I see the picture with the people in their exhibition, it's a kind of freak me out. I'm not used to, and makes me a little bit nervous and uncomfortable at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, not to put you on the couch, as we say here, but maybe it's people who naturally tend to be introverts that end up putting as much time as you have into mastering digital technologies and being in front of the screen. And so suddenly to have a project that is as extroverted as that maybe just felt quite surprising and possibly, as you say, a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So here we come to the star of the show in some ways. So I think of everything that you've made so far, this is the object that has had the most traction, most presence out there in the digital media landscape. So this is the Hartensia Chair, and here we're looking at a digital version of it. Yes, digitally.
Exactly.
Created. Yeah. Okay. So I would love to hear you talk about this particular object, and maybe we could spend a little bit of time on its conception, its execution, and its journey.
Yes, of course. At first, when I was starting on the creation of Hartensia, I as always, my work is a thing of testing, back and forth, and I start with a concept, with an idea or some, and I start to play with it around like a kid, and free play completely. So I was trying to achieve a kind of flowery in a floral texture, but trying to avoid the literality of using actual shapes of petals or plants, or the exact kind of print that a petal has. So I started to work with these kind of repetitions of geometric shapes. This Hortensia is created by capsule shapes, very geometric shapes, repeated randomly over the volume of the armchair. So while I was working on this, I stumbled upon many outputs, because as I said, the interface with what I work, it's very grid-based, very mathematical, and very abstract. So you have to touch numbers and change parameters. So I usually try to work in a two-stage kind of process, where in the first one, I start to create a lot of outputs without criticizing, without any limits. And then I start to curate that output and to edit what I have created, and start to polish and start to select, of course. So this chair, this textural flowering occur in one of those digital errors, where in my curation stage I was like, wow, this is something. I have to start working on doing like a formal output for this flowering thing, or evokes so much softness and this kind of of lightness that I want to be like surround of those things. I want to be like in a womb of this texture. So I started to create this kind of shape, and couple of days later, I posted the image on Instagram, and started to go viral, like very organically. I don't know, because I think it was compelling enough to for the majority of people, and it started to be like reposted and shared everywhere. It was crazy, because I started to receive not only like orders for a chair that only has like 1/4 face, because and nobody saw the hortensia from the back or from top, or on a close-up, and also a lot of magazines and press that started to create articles on this chair, as if it was physical. So that's why
that's why I wanted to go to this image, because of course then you decided to actually make it physically, so that you made the leap or crossed the bridge, we might say.
Yes, exactly. That's when I called Julia Ske, which is a textile designer, because I first tried to work with a company that can develop the whole chair, but everyone was like, oh no, this is impossible, this is very difficult, we will all lose a lot of money and time, forget about it. So I started to create my own team of people, of experts in each field, and Julia Ske was one of the main parts, because was the one that cracked down, that solved the how to achieve this flower texturing as much as the render.
Just one observation that I want to make about the design and the way that you described generating it is that you were really exploiting the possibilities of artificial intelligence, or however we might describe that. So creating many different possible outputs, which computers are very good at, and then selecting from them, which is a way that people often describe that co-creation that generative digitally empowered design consists of. But then presumably when you actually made the physical thing, and this is the physical thing we're looking at on the left, yes?
Yeah, both.
Yeah, the detail and the overall, when you made that physical thing, suddenly that generative capability was not in your hands anymore, or was it in some way? Like, were you able to carry over that generative quality into the physical thing?
Well, yeah, that was very interesting that you said, because we were with Julia recreating almost the same kind of process that I did in the digital. We created like a lot of patterns from different scales of these petals, with more separation, with less separation, with like bigger scale of petals, longer, more randomness in between them, and we started to look at them like from far distance, in order to understand, like almost like playing with AI, but in a more guided way, because we started to compare the render scale and view with the real and actual physical petals, and we started to investigate which of the scales combined was the best one for the physical piece. So it was almost the same process.
And what happened with these chairs when you actually started making them? Did you sell them as design commodities, or was that not the intention?
Well, Hortensia has a first limited edition of 15 pieces that was represented by Rosanna Orlandi Gallery in Milan.
Yeah.
It's all sold out. So we decided to work in collaboration with the brand Moi to create an alternative version of the Hortensia, and more accessible version also, because we receive a lot of orders that were I'm basically an artist that is more focused into unique pieces, or very limited editions, like 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, 15 Hortensia, it's like too much. It's a lot. And people asking for an order in more than 15, for me was not in any way I was going to open a more massive edition. So that's why we thought that doing a collaboration with Moi was a good way to solve this kind of accessibility limit.
It's fascinating to me, Andres, that you would say that you're not interested in mass production and that you're really interested in the unique, because it strikes me that a digital artifact is simultaneously totally unique and also infinite in its quantity, because it can appear on potentially an infinite number of screens and be identical, more or less. And yet it's also just one thing. And then when you're in a limited edition, or then with Moi, this more serially produced version, you're dealing at different economies of scale. So you're really confronting the entire spectrum there, from one to a few to quite a lot to an endless number. And it's like your practice is operating at all those different points on a quantity spectrum simultaneously all of a sudden.
Well, I have like a thesis on that I try that I like to apply to almost every of my pieces. That it's I want to create demand before creating supply of it. So that's why I use, and I like to use digital tools in order to create and test demand for something before creating supply of it. I'm too much. I think we are waste of brands and little independent designers creating a lot of physical objects that are stored in a warehouse, trying to create demand to place them somewhere instead of actually you can test if something is appealing and if something have demand before actually wasting resources and
Yeah.
and time and money and everything.
So basically what you're saying is that with digital production and distribution, you can float a prototype effectively and see whether it will actually catch the imagination of the public. And there's a kind of efficiency to that, but also a kind of strategic intelligence to it, because it allows you to put your resources where you will most benefit from them. So it's like it's a sustainability idea, but it's also a kind of economic business model, if you will.
Yeah, of course. But also, I think in the why the world have to have some object that nobody wants.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and getting that feedback on your own work must be fascinating, and I suppose the different ways in which that feedback must come to you. So in some ways it's just quantitative, like how many likes does it get on Instagram, but then you also have the more precise question of how many people are inquiring about whether they can have this thing, etc. Well, what I want to do now is maybe shift the conversation a little bit into a more general framework. So we've looked at some specific projects, especially the Hortensia, in some detail. And what I want to ask you about now is this famous thing that happened earlier this year when you sold several designs using an NFT auction platform, and they achieved what I think to many observers, including me, were startlingly high prices. And there were a lot of questions from what I would say are like conventional design critics as to what exactly had occurred. So what had you sold these people? What had they bought? And what does it all mean? So first, can you just say a little bit about what the auction actually was, and sort of, I mean, from a technical and just practical point of view, what did you do? And then let us know, perhaps secondarily, were you surprised as to the result?
Okay, yes, of course. Well, I was very intrigued from a couple of years because I was using and very, like, in a conceptual level, very attracted to cryptocurrencies. This idea of exchanging value in a decentralized way was like a mind fuck. So I started having some thoughts over it, and at the start of this year, I created this exhibition that is called The Shipping, where at the same time it was like a kind of manifesto of physical versus digital, and what would be the best to put in criticize the physical and the digital, if not pieces of furniture that you have to lean your body, your weight on, in order to have utility. So I created this the shipping exhibition that was meant to be online, because the idea came up during lockdown, where all galleries and everything was closed. So I started to feel a little bit like bored of this way of selling artworks through very specific email orders or something like that. That it's always there, you know. It's like somebody can come to you and ask you for an artwork or for a piece of furniture, and they can go and came like 1 year after, and the piece is still there. So I was studying a way of stopping that, because it was very boring for me. I was like a kind of a circle that it was not very beneficial. So I thought of pushing the actual interest from my work, from my collectors, from my circles, into one very specific short amount of time, that was 15 minutes. So what I did was creating this exhibition in a platform that hosted it, and it was all the part of the technical aspects and very like developers and all codes were done by them. So I really focused on what I wanted of this exhibition. So I proposed 10 digital pieces that were pieces of furniture that some of them were backed with a physical entity, and some of them were only digital.
So sorry, can I interrupt you for 1 second, Andres, just to be crystal clear? When you say backed by a physical entity, you mean that there was, like the Hartensia chair, you made a physical version of the same design as well as the virtual one, yes? So there's
exactly
two expressions of the object, yeah.
Exactly. This could happen because like 4 or 5 years ago, we started to work with the Ethereum network, the blockchain, where we could host and create some tokens that are linked to the artwork itself. So it's a way of, it's an artificial scarcity of digital assets. So in that way, any collector from a traditional art world can collect a digital art piece, being shared, and it's all in a decentralized database. So it's impossible to crack down. That piece, it's unique and is not going to be available anywhere, and it's traceable. So if you want to see the past owners of a secondary piece, you can. If you want to see the prices of the history of that piece, you can. It's available for everyone. It's public, and it's forever open. So that was always like very attractive to me. So this whole exhibition, the shipping was hosted in the Ethereum network, and that's how I created a scarcity with digital assets.
And so is that the same thing as an NFT, non-fungible token? Is that what you're describing? Is the same terminology, yeah?
It's exactly that. Non-fungible is like irreplaceable, something like that.
Right, okay. And so what happened when the auction actually occurred is that you did in fact get a lot of interest, and some of these objects did go for quite a bit of money. And one of the things that I found most striking when we spoke about this earlier, Andres, is that the objects that were backed by a physical object that could potentially be made, that you would be the owner of by virtue of owning that token, did actually not necessarily get more money. So it wasn't the kind of set of relationships to value that you might expect.
Yeah, that was super interesting to experiment. I was, I can say, the first one to experiment that kind of result and that kind of output, and it was amazing to see a digital piece, a digital only piece, going so much in value comparison to a physical one, and also because, of course, some of the collectors of the digital pieces are into a thing of again not using a space or a physical space, or the idea of a physical piece ages in time while a digital one stays exactly the same, so the value only goes up without any kind of problem of materiality. So it was very interesting to explore that.
So Andres, given that you're in this privileged position of being in communication with these collectors who are interested in investing money in these digital artifacts, and obviously it's not just your designs, there's lots of things being sold as NFTs, many of which are equally only virtual. So famously, Jack Dorsey's first tweet, for example, was sold for some extraordinary amount of money. What is your view of the motivations of the people that are willing to spend what you might call real world money for these virtual artifacts? What's your understanding of that for those of us who are on the outside of the phenomenon?
Well, you have to think that there are a lot of collectors that are interested in digital assets. Of course, you have collectors that came from the cryptocurrency world, but there are also, I have many collectors that came from the traditional art world. Some of them were already collectors from my physical pieces. So there's like kind of a lot of people. A lot of them are or were into understanding the technology. So if you understand that the blockchain and understand the artificial scarcity and NFTs, you understand that a piece of art, a digital piece of art, is exactly the same scarcity and same unique property asset than any other physical artwork. So
that's a great comparison, because there, of course, is a maybe somewhat cynical view of the current art market more broadly, that the reason that prices have gone up for artwork so much is because they're a relatively unregulated and freely moving kind of commodity that can exchange hands between people who have a lot of financial means at their disposal. And it reminds me of, I don't know what you're going to think of this comparison, but there's a phenomenon happening here in the States. I don't know if it's happening in Europe or Latin America, but people are making these extraordinary glass bongs, so, pipes for smoking dope. And they're trading hands between usually people in the drug world, so dealers, who again have a lot of money. And sometimes these bongs will fetch money like $60,000, $75,000. And the way that it's been explained to me is that basically they're like financial instruments that are being handed back and forth in an unregulated way. Because if you want to sell a bong to somebody for a certain amount of money, you can just do it. So it's almost like a kind of black market currency, if you will. And I wonder to what extent you think that your designs are serving for this client class in a roughly analogous way of being like a newly created repository of value that could then in theory be traded and will hopefully hold its value as the same way that a fine artwork, a Picasso painting, or indeed a piece of real estate would. So do you think that that logic of these things being tradable financial instruments that are able to move around in a very frictionless way through cryptocurrency, is that part of the appeal?
I think there are many ways of seeing that proposal, that question. First of all, that also happens in the traditional art world for for decades, so it's not very different. And again, it all depends on your collector base, the way you interact with them, and how much you know them. You can see and you can enter to, it's everything very public and open, so you can go and on the pieces I have sold online as NFTs, and you can trace where they are. They are all in the best collections, and I know almost all of the owners. I have spoken with some of them many times. So of course there are other people that are more speculators and are into flipping artworks just to create like a kind of an artificial value for it and try to then sell them for to anyone else that want to pay them. But I think that happens in every market, in every it's like that's something that it's not from this market, like a kind of an exclusivity from this market.
It's not an innovation of this market. In fact, as you're saying, it actually might be more transparent than the conventional art market, because you can trace the sales and find out where these objects are.
Yeah, actually, almost all of the cryptocurrency wallets have KYC. So it's not a.
Sorry,
I don't know.
What does that mean, Andres?
It's know your customer. So it's like you can just go and throw a lot of money there in I don't know, in one of these cryptocurrency wallets and buy what you want. It's like it's a lot regulated. This has like many years in the market. So I think also that fiat currency is more easy to move than cryptocurrencies in terms of black markets and undesirable ways of using money. Cryptocurrencies are very traceable. Everything is very visible, and if you go to my wallet, you can see where I spend the money and where it came from, and you can follow the exact path from where the money came from and where the collector that bought my piece, where they received the money from, and they're known for infinity. So
at least potentially there's actually more accountability in this system than systems that we might be more familiar with. That's fascinating. I have just two more questions, Andres, and then I wanted to encourage and I'm just going to stop the slides now to ask these last questions. And I then wanted to just encourage the audience to weigh in with any questions they might have. We just have a few more minutes left, but hopefully we can take a couple. So I want to ask one kind of negative question and one positive question about this phenomenon that you're part of. And the negative one I'm almost obliged to ask and has been brought up a lot, which is the climate change footprint of Bitcoin mining, of NFTs, etc. I've even seen it said that the sum total of climate impact of Bitcoin mining is roughly equivalent to the economy of Argentina, your homeland. So we're not talking about a small amount here. It's a massive heat generating electricity using enterprise. And I wonder what your feelings about being dependent on a system that has that much climate change implication might be.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, because there's too much wrong information. It's not wrong, it's just out of context. Because when we talk about numbers and quantities, we have to always go in comparison to something. So do you know, for example, how much electricity the banking system costs? So I'm sure it's more than Argentina. So if you want to create information to go and contradict and go like fight something, you can always do, but going with this information without comparison to the actual system that we use, because it's the one that we have, it's just nonsense. Another thing that I would like to say is that the Bitcoin, for example, and Ethereum at the moment works on a proof of work way. That means that they need machines, they need technology like actual, physical pieces of computers that solves problems very fast. So that consumes a lot of energy. The actual and truth information is that I think 75% of it in the world, it's renewable green energy that came from hydro or other kind of energy supplies. And there is like a 25% that is migrating at the moment, of course. to green again. So there's minimal stuff that it's consuming a huge amount of energy. Also, a very important thing that is more political, but I think the blockchain and Bitcoin, for example, proposal is creating these computers have to be somewhere in any country, in any place in the world. So and you, if you have a huge amount of computers solving these problems of the blockchain, you want the energy very cheap, because if you're getting rewarded for solving these problems, you want to pay the electricity and can have a living out of it. It's like kind of a work also. So you will find countries and places where there's green energy, there's cheap energy, and you can live there and make your business there, and of course pay electricity. And that places happen to be countries where they have a lot of hydro electricity. So it's a way of promoting the use of renewable energies in the world. And another thing is that we are migrating to proof of stake, that it's not, we don't need miners to verify and solve problems. We just do it another way in cryptography. So that's something that will come in. That we already live with a lot of blockchains and cryptocurrencies that are based on a proof of stake thing. The just Bitcoin, Ethereum are the most, like the top two most famous, and those are the ones most old. So it's very interesting how in less than 10 years we have already a new technology that is proof of stake working perfectly and solving the issue of energy that Bitcoin is having at the moment. So
okay, let me.
It's always a kind of context and comparison.
Just because, yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic answer, and I think people will be studying that answer and learning from it who have been listening. I just have one last question, and then a couple from the audience really quickly. We're a little over time, but this is so interesting that I want to just go a little longer than usual. So my question is just about value creation, and whether you think that there's also a utopian aspect to this that allows for economic growth in a way that the physical world itself could not withstand any longer. Because if you, as I said a moment ago, people who are interested in buying your objects are effectively buying a newly created repository of value. But despite what we were just talking about with sustainability of, cryptocurrency mining, and as you've been describing it, could actually move to a very, very light footprint on the physical world. And that as the greater digital economy starts to absorb more and more capital, that it's a way of providing a model of growth that doesn't actually impact the physical environment. Is that something that you believe in? And is that part of, if I could say this, the ideology of your work?
Yes, of course. I think it's very aligned with my way of creating demand before supply, and my idea of just don't create physically anything that nobody wants.
Yeah, okay. And of course, if we can get enough people to buy into the idea that owning these things digitally is satisfactory, then we may never need to resort to those.
Oh no, not at all. I don't have that vision of these metaverse addicts that we are going to escape into these kind of virtual realities. No, not at all. We are not escaping from the material world anytime soon. We are material beings living with actual material stuff. So we really need them. I'm just proposing not to oversupply.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is that you're adopting a both and rather than an either or approach to this question of the virtual
Exactly.
and physical. Yeah, and obviously that's been playing out in your career so far. Okay, just a few questions, and if you don't mind answering them super quickly, just because we're short on
Yeah,
time,
of course.
that would be great. So let's see. First, how do you feel about the obsolescence of technology? NFTs are hot now, but would they go the way of the Walkman when something better comes around? And this is different from traditional art that can last for centuries, depending on what it's made from. So do you feel like there's an obsolescence problem here that a Renaissance painting maybe didn't have?
Um, no, I think it's a matter of it's history. NFTs are a piece of history. It's the first time in the history of this planet as we know it and our species that can create artificial scarcity for digital assets. So it's quite huge.
Okay. Tim Tate, artist friend of ours, asks, I have many NFTs that are also objects that I have created and posted. And he's using OpenSea.io. The problem seems to be how to get noticed in a sea of millions of NFTs now. A different kind of scarcity oversupply problem. So the NFT universe itself is becoming too crowded. Any advice about that?
Yeah, well, OpenSea is like a kind of a, I don't like to make comparisons, but it's a kind of like it's like an OpenSea. It's more like where you go on your phone to buy some things that you need in your home or your office. You know, it's like very so it's very difficult to be the one that someone choose. Also, it's very difficult to find traditional art collectors that are scrolling through OpenSea. So I can make the same comparison as a kind of you can have like a gallery in a inhospitable and not conquered city, and your artworks are great and are there. Nobody see them. But if you are in a gallery that it's very well exposed and it's very famous, it's much more easy that people and collectors and very important people that like the curation of that gallery will go and see your work. So
so in some ways it's actually replicating the different context for seeing and selling that we have in the real world, but just in a virtual space. So they're more exclusive and more mass market platforms, if you like.
Exactly.
Just like we have Amazon, we have Friedman Benda.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and speaking of Friedman Benda, Alex Gilbert at the gallery asks, Andres, do you invest in NFT art by others?
Yes, I do. I'm very I'm not like a big collector, but yes, I choose very well, and I have some.
Sure. Okay. Okay. And last question. This is coming from Marian Santella, who's actually writing from Mar del Plata in Argentina. So this is our last question. She says, which book or documentary do you suggest to study object design and architecture for applying in digital artworks and translating them into the concrete world? And maybe if I could just frame that in a slightly different way, because I think it's a good last thing to leave on. How would you suggest people who don't know about this whole universe educate themselves about it, apart from listening to our interview?
I think I'm not the most tutor artist, but I can say what I do and what I did. It's I never found answers or very interesting stuff in books and things that are very literal to what you are looking for. For example, if you are wanting to understand and to design and to create objects, just don't go to the books that are teaching you how to create objects. I usually I'm into more philosophy books or yeah, history books, um, a lot of stuff. I read about almost everything, but in a very non-linear way.
Yeah.
I think I have more books about anything else than design and art.
Yeah, that's such a great way to leave it, because in so many ways, that's an answer that any artist or designer could have given for hundreds of years. And I completely agree with you that if you want to do something innovative, you have to be a nonlinear and expansive and lateral thinker. It's not just a matter of looking at the thing that you're trying to create as it was conceived 10 years ago and just doing that, because of course that's going to only lead you to replicate what's already been imagined. So it's so interesting to talk to you, Andres, because there are so many novel and innovative aspects of what you're doing that are breathtaking, particularly to people who aren't really involved in that world. And then there are also so many elements of continuity, and I think that's just been great to explore that with you. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really
Thank you,
brilliant.
Glenn.
And
Thank
thanks for
you.
your openness about all aspects of what it's been like for you, both on the level of feeling and, business strategy, as well as technically and conceptually. It's really appreciated that you're so kind of available for these questions. Really appreciate that. I just want to say to the audience that we are back, of course, next week, and Stephen Burks will be in the interviewer's chair, and he'll be talking to Mabel Wilson and her colleagues who created the Reconstruction show at MoMA. So it's a show about Blackness and architectural history. Super important project, and it's great that we'll be having Professor Wilson joining us. So please come back for that in a week. And that's it for today. Andres, thanks again.
Thank you, Glenn. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.